Task 2 in extending our JavaScript knowledge will be to create a simple web page containing HTML elements that allow the user to select an engine CC from a drop-down list, but the drop-down list must be populated from an array which has three values: less than 1600, greater than or equal to 1600, and less than or equal to 3000, and the third one greater than 3000. They must also be able to select an insurance type from a drop-down list, which again is populated from an array with three values. And they must be able to select any of four additions for the vehicle insurance, where the checkboxes are populated again from an array with values. So now we want to create a JavaScript function that will calculate the insurance quote value and display it. And the rules for working out the quote are: there's an initial base insurance of $100. Then, if the engine size is greater than 1600 or equal to 1600 and less than or equal to 3000, it's another $50. If the engine CC is greater than 3000, it's $100 we add. And then we have the extras, and the extras are a third party fire and theft. So for third party, it's $50 extra. For third party fire and theft, it's $150. And for fully comprehensive, it's $200. Then we have some additions, in which case we add $100 for each addition on the policy. For example, in the screenshot, you can see additional driver over 25 or protect your no claims. So once we do the calculation of the quote within the function, then what we want to do is display the updated data every time something changes. So if the engine CC changes, or the insurance type changes, or they click on a button, we want it to change the quote value. And you can see in the screenshot that the quote amount is currently $650, so that will be getting updated. Once again, we're not too worried about CSS styling. So now we will look at the code and try to understand the code that we're going to put in. We'll not concentrate too much on the HTML, but the HTML obviously is there for people to click and fill in the details. It's the JavaScript we're worried about, but we still need our HTML. So if we look at our HTML very quickly, we can see that we have a label for the engine CC, and we have an ID, and we're saying that we can update or use the update function when this changes. And then we have a select engine capacity. So we have a label, a select, and an option within it. Then we have another label, another select, and another option. Just HTML. Then we have another label, which is for extra requirements. So select any additions for the policy. And we have a div of extra requirements. And then finally, we have the quote details. So we have a quote details paragraph, P, with an ID, quote details, and that's where the details are going to be shown. The important thing really in this is when we look here in the option, that the options here don't have anything apart from select an engine capacity, select an insurance type. We will populate those from an array. So starting off, we will create a constant called engine CC, which is an array, and we'll put in our three values. Then what we need to do then is to iterate through those three values and put them out as an element. And the element is going to go within our engine CC. So we go document.getElement by ID, engine CC. So that will find the element on our HTML page. Dot options counter. So dot options is something that will be a part of the HTML. And we're saying dot options 0 because 0 is the start of counter. Equals a new option engine CC, which is the array, naught, because the counter is naught, so it'll pick less than 1600, and it'll give that a value of 0. So what this is saying is, okay, I want less than 1600 to be at position 0, and it's an element which we're adding to the engine CC. The same thing then applies for the insurance type. So the insurance type, third party fire and theft, third party comprehensive, we want to iterate through each one of those and populate them. And we can see here in the explanation that the option constructor creates a new HTML option element. So it creates a new HTML element, and when we use it, we're using what text we want and what value we want. So in the last example, that's what we said, that we want this part to be the text. So engine CC was the array, and position naught was the less than 1600, and then the second part was 0. So that was the value. So we're giving it a value which is related to the counter. And this is the same in this example. So constant insurance equals is the array, and then we iterate through it and we add a new element at position 0, 1 and 2. And then the next part is where we have the optional extras. So the optional extras is again an array, and in this case what we want to do is we want to create it as a checkbox. So if we move back, we can see that it was checkboxes in the diagram, 4 checkboxes. So we're going to iterate again, and we're going to say, okay, how many items are in this array? So that's the optional policy extras dot length, and then we say I want to create a var checkbox, in other words a variable checkbox, which is equal to document dot create element input label document dot create element label. We want to set this checkbox not just to be an input, but we want it to be of type checkbox. So this is creating the input in this line for our checkbox, and this is setting the type of it. And then we want to set the value. So we want to set the value of this checkbox to be optional policy extras 0, which would be the 1500 excess cover. And obviously as we iterate the array, that will change to the next one, etc. So this is the way in which we are creating the checkbox and the data that goes with it, or the text that goes with it. So we then go extras for policy, which is this piece up here, var extras for policy equals document.getElement by ID extra requirements, and the extra requirements was here in this div. So we're setting that. So extra requirements dot append child checkbox, which is our checkbox, and extras for policy dot append child label. So we're putting the label out and the checkbox, and then we just create the node or append the child node. This onChange equals update means that we want to run the method called update when something changes. Now, having populated the drop downs and the checkboxes, what we want to do is create our function. Our function is going to be called update, and initially we set the initial quote amount to be 100. Then we get the value from the engine CC ID, and we set it equal to engine CC position. So it'll be like position 0 or position 1 or 2, because we set the value of it to be the counter position. Then we go, if the engine CC position is 1, we add 50. At naught, we didn't do anything. We didn't say we wanted to add anything on. We just keep it at the 100 for the base. If it's position 2, we add 100. Then we do the same thing for the insurance type. And we say for the insurance type, get element by ID insurance type. And when we get the type, we get the value. The value will be 0, 1 or 2. If it's 0, we add 50. If it's 1, we add 150. And if it's 2, we add 200. After we have done that then, we will set up an array called additional policy requirements. And now what we want to do is we want to iterate over the values in the optional policy extras. So in our case there are 4, but we go dot length, and that will find the 4 for us. And we go if the document.getElement by ID not is checked, then we set the additional policy requirements to have that value. So we do a dot push to push the value optional policy extras not into that position. Then what we want to do is we want to work out what the extra charges are. So now we want to set up the const chargeable extras. We want to work out how much we have to charge for the extras. Well, each one is for $100. And earlier we created an array called additional policy requirements. And the additional policy requirements was initially 0. But what we did here was we then iterated through it and added any of those that were checked. So we now know how many have been checked and they have been put into the array. So now what we're saying is that find the length of that, and if it is 0, then we won't really do anything. If it's greater than 0, we want the initial quote amount to have a certain value added on. Well, what value? Each one is 100, and if there are 3, then that would be an extra 3 times 100, which is 300. If there was 2, 2 times 100, etc. So if it's greater than 0, we charge 100 times the number that have been checked. And then we print out a message at the element which has quote details. So we're going to print a message out there, so we need to find that first, and we'll set it to a value called const message. Then we set the inner HTML of that element, which is now called message, to say backtick means we are using this string interpolation, template literal. The quote amount is currently, and then we wanted to say a $sign, so we put $. But because it's a variable, we also use $, with the open curly brace and the closed curly brace. And we say initial quote amount, but we want that to be to 2 decimal places. And then the last part we do is const details equals our JSON array basically here, console.log the details. That is what that JSON basically is. And then we end our script, and we end our body, and we end our HTML, and then we constantly update. So what we'll do now is we will now code that and see how it works. So let us now open up Visual Studio Code again, and we will create another HTML. So right click, new file, JavaScript, Task2 .html. So to get our HTML document, we put in our exclamation mark, and we see it comes up, and if we just press the enter key, we will have a template. And now what we want to do is we want to add into the body some information. You can put in your documentation like this, and I will change this to say task 2. So we'll have a heading. We have our blocks for our label and for our select, as you saw when we talked in the PowerPoint. So if we just enter their different blocks for the insurance type, and the third one then is down here for our label for extra requirements, which will be our checkboxes. So that's our basic elements on the HTML page. But obviously, as we said earlier, they're not finished because we need to populate them using the arrays, and we haven't created the arrays or the script. But if we were to look at the JavaScript Task2 and view it in the browser, we can see that yes, there is a drop down and a drop down, and then there's a select any additions, but there are no checkboxes yet. Perfect, that's exactly what we want at this moment in time. So what we need to do now is create a script. We can create the script as we did in task 1 within the head, or we can create it within the body. So I will just continue and we'll put it into the body. So we have script, and the end script. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the engine CC. So in the engine CC, tidy this up a little bit. So in the engine CC, what we're trying to do is we're trying to populate the drop-down box. So we saw earlier that we did that using an iteration where we got the element by ID. So we get the element by ID, engine CC, and then we are going to create a new option, and the new option is going to have engine CC not for the first one because our counter is 0, and engine CC is your array, so that should be 1600, and its value will be 0. So if somebody selects that, it will be value 0. If somebody selects this one, it will be 1. And if somebody selects this one, it will be 2. And if we once again go back to our browser and do a refresh, we can see now the 3 values. So we're beginning to get the idea that we're populating the drop-down from an array. Now we can do the same for our insurance type. So this is quite lengthy in this one here because there are a lot of comments. Again, I'll just format. So the comments are there to help you, but you saw those already within the PowerPoint. So again, it's the same thing that we're trying to do. We're trying to populate the drop-down, and the drop-down this type is insurance type, and we're populating it from this array. So again, if we go back and look in the browser, we'll now see that we've got third-party fire and theft and fully comprehensive. And then the final one that we will need to do will be then to populate the checkboxes. So the first part will be to create a constant called optional policy extras, which is really an array that holds the values that we want to put in. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of values that we have, or 4 values that we have in our array. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to get our element which has an ID of extra requirements. So get element by ID extra requirements, and we'll put it equal to a variable called extra values for policy. And now we do the long part, which is the iteration. You can see that I'm calling here document.getElementById extra requirements. But further on up in the code, there was a small error where the ID was somehow apparent. So if I change that to extra requirements, then this should be fine now. So if we go back to our browser and do a refresh, we can now see that we have our checkboxes, 4 of them, populated with the labels that come from the array. So everything is going well so far, and obviously what we want to do is be able to change these, and this value down here should change. But in order to be able to do that, we need obviously the update function or update method, in this case an update function. So we're going to populate the code with our function called update. So just put our code in, and I'll just format my document again. So now that we have our update function, everything now should update as we look into our browser and change the engine CC. You can see that this has changed to 200, third party fire and theft. So if we go back and change this to 1600, fully comprehensive, and change these two buttons, we get 500, which is what we said in this example. So a bit of test-driven development. We knew that this is what we wanted, and the same for the 1600 greater than and less than. So change that. Then third party fire and theft, and only one option. Third party fire and theft, and then just the one option gives me 400, and this says 400.